Week 14 was highlighted by a lot of desperate plays to get into the playoffs. We saw receivers go down with injury. We saw the Bengals and the Jaguars win. So it's Victory Monday for Nick and I here on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. As always, we are brought to you by No House Advantage. As always, we celebrate our wins. So Bengals and Jaguars wins this week. Nick and I are going to be flying high. We're going to go through every game this week. The Bengals did some shenanigans, so we got to talk about that when we get to that. But let's start off with Thursday, which for 53 minutes was farce. And then it was the Baker Mayfield show to finish this game. Nick, what a weird game. What a wild finish. Again, we sign off on Thursday night on Sirius XM, and the game gets more interesting after we sign off.
It happens almost every single week. It's happened on some Monday games as well. But yeah, this was – I thought the Raiders, losing the Jeff Saturday game, you can't really sink any lower than that. I think this is maybe worse, that they've taken the two most egregious losses, not against the spread – or anything like that, but just in terms of situation in recent memory. I mean, you're bringing in Baker Mayfield on basically 2 days to acclimate himself to the playbook. And we saw Wolford play one series, didn't even attempt to pass. Then it was Baker time. I don't really know what the impetus was behind not actually starting Baker Mayfield. It seemed like that was the plan all along, was that he was going to be the guy. But man, what an effort by the Raiders. It felt like they came into this game just assuming that they had won, and all they had to do was just kind of kill 60 minutes of clock. Derek Carr looked awful through two really bad picks. Defensively, obviously, they let their guard down late in this game. And man, for a Raiders team that we were talking about as, maybe, just maybe, you had an outside chance to keep this momentum going, push for that final wild card spot in the AFC. I mean, this is a crushing, shocking defeat. So, I wrote it beating the book, and I took the Raiders to cover, by the way, so I was wrong. But yeah, I did right. If there's one team in the NFL that would be capable of finding a way to lose to Baker Mayfield with 2 days to prepare, it would be the Raiders. So at least I hit on that. But I still, at the end of the day, I didn't really have faith that the Rams offensively would be able to hang in this game. But the other story, too, is they held the Raiders to 16 points.
The Raiders held the Raiders to 16 points.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it.
You had a banged up Josh Jacobs. He hurt his hand. Obviously, he was wincing every time he had a play, especially if it was a pass. Why aren't you throwing to this guy named Davante Adams, who had two huge plays in the first half? He had 3 targets in the second half, one of which was that final play of the game, which was another interception. But, it just there was no I felt like, like you said, they were just trying to kill the clock for 60 minutes. They thought that the Rams couldn't score, and they got cocky. They got full of it. And the Rams did get a little lucky. There was some surreal stuff happening, including the whole bat the ball out of the quarterback's hand play at the end there.
Yep.
I mean, just crazy stuff. I mean, they didn't need to do that. But the thing is, they took their foot off the gas. They got what they deserved.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And I think it goes back to failing to score before the half. That was a Derek Carr interception in the end zone. Just kind of a sloppy play, maybe got his arm hit a little bit. But, I think at that point, the Raiders just kind of assumed that they were going to put points on the board and that would be it. But, going into the halftime, only down 10, I think that was big for the Rams. I think, I think if you're LA, you didn't feel great about how you played in the first half, but you're saying, look, we're down 2 scores to a team that we probably don't think is all that good. Like, we are in this game. And like you said, you got the sense that the Raiders just completely did not take this game seriously. They were treating it as a win from the jump. And you see 1 or 2 of these games every year, and every time you're looking back and you're just saying, like, how could you allow this to happen? But this is now twice from the Raiders that, being in the best spot possible on paper, that they found a way to squander it. Good note, by the way, on Davante Adams from Matt Schneiderman. He's the Packers reporter over at The Athletic. Davante Adams caught less than 4 passes only 1 time in 62 games with the Green Bay Packers. He has 4 games already this season with fewer than 4 catches.
Wow. Just wow. It's just total malpractice. Complete, utter total malpractice. They really thought that they didn't need to score, that there was no way the Rams could score against them. They got what they deserve. I mean, There was a couple of dimes by Baker at the end. One of those was a forced ball to Skoranek, though. They kept that long drive going. But you know what? It got to the right spot. And
that's a hell of a catch by Skoranek, too.
It was. And you know what? Hey, you got what you deserve. Cam Akers, 12 for 42. Got that one touchdown that got which paid your fantasy bills because he didn't do a whole lot otherwise. Barely converted on fourth down prior to that on the little pass play. There was the refs came to flag that day. There were a lot of penalties in this game on both sides. Both sides had some grievance. Like there was a series there where the Raiders were holding, and then they got away with a hold on against Max Crosby that kept the drive going because I think they got some flag fatigue almost. But there were some weird plays earlier. There was a bad hold early on one, like on a little play on the flat. I mean, it was barely a hold at that. And after the series was up, after the third down failed, the lineman got flagged for the yapping at the Rams player. I don't know exactly what he said. He may have said a magic word or so, but still, it turned it from a 46-yard field goal to a 61-yarder.
Yeah.
Yes, you got to be able to control your emotions, but come on, it's not a ref show. Come on, I didn't like that flag. I thought there was just too many hair trigger flags. But then again, the Raiders, they knocked the ball out of the player's hand. I mean, it's because it's a hurry up drill. You can't be doing that sort of stuff. So it's a flag. But man, what a huge play.
Yeah, we saw a few kind of semi-controversial calls, starting with this Thursday game. Obviously, the roughing the passer last night in the Dolphins-Chargers game. I tweeted this out last night and got a little bit of pushback, but like if the NFL is going to insist on calling these roughing the passers, I think we could all agree as football fans that we would prefer that they're just not called. But that doesn't seem like it's going to be an option. Like they're going to call something. Can we treat it like roughing versus running into the kicker? Like if it's an egregious, you go head first, the quarterback slammed to the ground, sure, 15 yards, first down. But if it's that situation where you're Jalen Phillips, you're bracing yourself, you're trying everything you can do to not put your weight on the quarterback. If you still want to flag it, that's fine, but just make it a 5-yard penalty. Don't be an automatic first down. Like the issue is these controversial calls cannot result in, like in that case, that was like a 25-yard swing in field position as well as a first down. I mean, it basically takes a turnover off the board.
It does. And that was a big play in the game, huge play in the game. It was suggested maybe by Collinsworth last night that maybe they should allow for a review process of some sort. No.
Sure. I don't want to add more reviews, but it's better than what we have right now.
It was kind of a Pandora's box to add review to pass interference. It's a judgment call after all. But when the ref specialist doesn't rush to defend the refs on the field, it's a bad call. And Terry McCauley was like, no, I don't think that's a call. I don't think, and all that. It's rare. The ESPN guy, I forget his name, but that's okay. You don't have to remind me because I don't really care. He reflexively defends the refs on the field every time. He's probably the worst. Pereira is probably the best. But nonetheless, I don't want ref specialists. We have enough of that. I don't really need to have, explain every single call. No one's here to hear that. I mean, it's just you're supposed to be kind of like, make sure the game happens. You're not a highlight of the show. Ugh. Sorry.
Yeah, it does feel sometimes, and I really want to avoid going into a deeper hole on officiating here. But even the touchdown versus non-touchdown, catch versus non-catch calls, like I think we need to start doing the kind of innocent till proven guilty strategy. It feels like it's the opposite right now. It's like the NFL is doing everything it can to make everything not a catch or everything not a touchdown. Like, let's just assume everything is a catch or is not a touchdown, and then we have to go the other way. Like I don't know why we're seemingly trying to eliminate fun plays and take points off the board as much as we can. Like I kind of would like to see a little bit more of a benefit of the doubt, speed up the game involved in this process.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to survive the ground. Sometimes you have to survive the nature of man, that we're all mortal. It's really difficult to overcome that sort of burden, especially the latter one there. Anything else from this Thursday game? I know we got a little far afield there.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, most people have probably listened to podcasts or read up on this game by now, so I don't think we need to dive too much into it. I mean, the only thing is we'll just be keeping a very close eye on Josh Jacobs, who is going to undergo some tests on that finger. Haven't really received an update over the last few days. You would imagine it's nothing overly serious, but that combined with the calf injury that he's been nursing will definitely be something to monitor heading into the fantasy playoffs.
Baker Mayfield had 2 days to prepare for this game. He'll have a lot more. They play the Monday night game in Lambeau for that. Whereas the Raiders, they're home against the Pats. So the Pats have the second of their leg out west, if you will. They're doing Arizona Monday, and then tonight, that is, and then Sunday against Raiders. I think they'll probably have to stay out west then, I'm guessing.
I would imagine. Yeah, I'd be shocked if they flew all the way back twice.
Though it didn't work out so well for the Dolphins. But we'll get to that, too. All right, that's a happy place. Let's talk a little Bengals. Hooday! Let's go. Let's go. Okay, first of all, the unhappy part. They were clearly playing shenanigans with the roster movement. And I believe that a massive fine should be coming down their way because they lied. He was limited on Thursday and Friday, yet they cleared him from the injury list. Oh, he aggravated in warmups. That's why, he played like one snap. I'm talking about T. Higgins. And, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated for everybody else out there that had him. Key week 14 matchup. It's a second time with Higgins specifically. This kind of happened against a divisional foe. He was on the field as a decoy in that Sunday night game against the Ravens, if you recall, and he had a big bagel in that game too. So totally killed you twice this year with this.
Yeah, I mean, this was a disaster scenario for fantasy, especially at this point in the season. A lot of people playing their way in, or in some cases out of the playoffs. I mean, Tyler Boyd too exits this game early. No real foul play there, but
that was just a legit injury on the field.
Right. Yeah. That was just really bad luck. If you started Tyler Boyd, if you had some sort of Boyd Higgins stack, you basically just took a 0 at receiver this week. And Jamar Chase was kind of left to be the man in this offense. And I mean, the Higgins situation, we didn't find out until after the game that he allegedly tweaked it in warmups. Who knows if that's the case? Maybe that's Zach Taylor, trying to cover his behind a little bit, maybe avoid some of that fine. I'm with you. I do think a fine is coming. I think there's going to be enough outrage. There's enough money tied up in fantasy football. And frankly, the league has made it clear that teams can't be doing this, right? There's a reason you don't see it very often, because I think teams are in accordance, and they understand there will be consequences if they're not honest with their injury reports. So yeah, to me, this reeks of something that the Bengals probably knew about in days previous. And the assumption is they wanted some sort of competitive edge, but he did play one snap, right? Is that correct?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if that, does that play into it at all? Is there some sort of he was on the field for one snap? Does that absolve us of any wrongdoing? I'm not really sure what the goal is there, because if he did tweak it in warmups, why did he play one snap?
Yeah, I would have to watch the all 11 and see did he actually run a route, or did he just stand there? It's like, it was
one route ran. So
yeah. The coaches, and there were the sideline reporters coaches choosing to hold him out now. Okay, sure, choosing to. Yeah, and the thing is, you can see why the motivation, because the Browns, if with time to prepare, knowing that Higgins might not play, well, they know he was limited in practice. They had to report that. They should have been prepared a little bit, but you would think that they'd have doubles on Chase all the time. And they did it. And sometimes Chase, though, on the touchdown, Chase beat a double team. In fact, he didn't even know the ball was coming until the nanosecond before it got there. But Burrow forced it in this tight little window and got it through perfectly. But it was kind of funny though. But they did find some ways later in the game to find a way to get him open, scheme him open on the sideline. He made some big plays. So anyhow, very frustrating there. Joe Mixon looked good. He had 14 carries, 96 yards. He had the 40-yarder in the second half. Most of his better runs came in the second half. Yep. Pirine got the touchdown. Oddly, Pirine had a couple of drops in the passing game. A couple of pretty bad ones, actually. One was maybe a bad throw by Burrow, but there's two others that were on Pirine. But he had the weird touchdown in his own right where Clowney gave up on the play when Pirine bounced it outside. They just didn't wrap, and he brought it in for the touchdown there. So that's the sort of ratio I expect, though, where Mixon gets 75% of the snaps, I would guess, 60 to 75%.
Yeah, it was 39 snaps for Mixon and 29 for Pirine. Pirine a little more involved in passing downs. That was relatively equal, but 14-4 in terms of carries in favor of Joe Mixon. So like you said, I think that's about what we predicted. Kind of a weird script though for Cincinnati. I think losing Higgins and then losing Boyd, they played a combined 3 snaps in this game. So I think this is not necessarily how the Bengals wanted to play this game. I think I wouldn't really say they were conservative necessarily. I mean, they threw a flea flicker for a touchdown for Christ's sake, but at the same time, I think this game looks a lot different if both Higgins and Tyler Boyd are healthy. And, they start the game with 3 punts. You could tell they were a little bit out of sorts. But this Bengals defense, man, 2 straight huge stops at the end of this game. I mean, Cleveland was kind of borderline threatening to make this a little bit interesting at the end, but big stop in the red zone after a long Cleveland drive. Bengals go 3 and out and get another quick stop to really slam the door shut. So I've been really impressed with Cincinnati overall. I think this is the type of game that a lot of good teams like the Bengals, all of a sudden you lose your second and third receiver, really integral parts to this offense. I think there's a lot of teams that would panic, that would get away from their game plan, that could let a game like this slip away. And they didn't. They just didn't. I mean, that defense, it's a top 10 defense now, Jeff. This is a number 7 defense in the league in terms of passing EPA. Deshaun Watson put up a lot of yards, but part of that was the fact that he threw the ball 42 times.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and almost the entire second half was all was almost all passing. Although it was funny, Adam Archuleta was like, this is after the Browns went down, I think 20, it was 20, I think actually when it was 23-10, it might have been even 20-10 at that point in time. He was like, okay, they can't afford to do their usual plodding down the field. And what did they do? They plodded down the field.
Yeah.
He was right, by the way. They didn't have enough time. But it was funny. What struck me was Cleveland couldn't run the ball. Nick Chubb, his long was 13 yards, 14 for 34, though. Kareem Hunt, 4 for 6. Watson had a couple of scrambles, but you're right. Watson had to throw the ball. He only got sacked twice, but he's pressured a lot. A couple of those runs were the result of pressures where he just got barely past the line of scrimmage. They left some points on the field, though. Very first drive, they drive all the way down to like the Bengals 20 and go for it on 4th and 1. They bring in Jacoby Brissett. You're okay, and it was like inches, 4th and inches too.
Yep.
Maybe it was less than a full yard. You're thinking, okay, they brought him in for the sneak. Fine. No, they did a play action. I actually kind of applaud a little bit of it, but then he overthrows the receiver in the end zone. And it's like, you have this super expensive quarterback that you traded for. You traded tons of assets for and all that. And you replaced Brissett with him. And now you're bringing in Brissett for a 4th down play only and a trick play. Not even a trick play, but just a surprise play. Yeah. You play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
I think calling it a trick play, it did almost feel that way, and I was kind of watching that game passively. All of a sudden I look up and Brissett's in the game. I'm going to Twitter. I'm like, did Watson get hurt? Like, what is going on here? And Brissett's one of those guys. Isn't he like 98% conversion rate on QB sneaks for his career?
He's really good at it.
So I get that, you're obviously the defense is thinking it's going to be a sneak. I understand that, but just run the sneak, get the first down. Like it's such a risky play. To throw it deep in that situation. And I think if you're Cincinnati and you say, all right, would you rather try to stop a QB sneak, even if you know it's coming, or have Jacoby Brissett throw the ball 40 yards downfield? I think you'll take your chances with the latter.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder if he audibled on that one there, or if that was the play call along. Very interesting scenario there. Peoples-Jones was the main receiver, 8 for 114. Njoku looked pretty good. Mm-hmm. Cooper only had 2 catches for 42, and he's listed as kind of questionable this week. He came into the game as a game-time decision with a hip injury, had 1 catch overturned. He actually looked okay, but he's clearly not going to be 100% this week, so something to watch for with him too.
Yeah, he looked good early on and then just really didn't do a whole lot over the final 3 quarters of this game. Nick Chubb, by the way, barely even in the top 15 among running backs over the last 4 weeks. Really since his bye week. So the last 5 weeks, has only broken 100 yards once in that span, and that came on 26 carries against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Only in
overtime too. Remember that he needed to get that overtime touchdown. I know that all too well because my NFFC primetime team has Chubb, and he was awesome early. And I'm like, in your face. I got him late 3rd round and all that. And now I'm like, okay. Need a big week. Would be nice. Bengals travel to Tampa this week. No Trey Hendrickson, by the way, broken wrist. Mm-hmm. They think he might be back for like the regular season finale is what they're talking. So it's going to be a lengthy absence. Pretty tough injury there for that. Cleveland's one of the 3 Saturday games this week. Baltimore, they're hosting Baltimore. So pretty big game. For on both sides, although Cleveland's kind of toast. They're toast this year, but still it's a rivalry game. Old Cleveland versus New Cleveland. So there's that. And Baltimore, obviously, every game matters to them. Mm-hmm. Tickets are as low as $18 according to ESPN on the schedule page there. So that's in Cleveland. I can see that StubHub's not doing so well on that one. It's the cheapest one out there. Next cheapest is the Chargers. Not a shock, actually, because they don't have a huge fan base. All right. Let's move on to the next game. We are just going so fast right now, but that's okay. We had to go in depth with my own team. So there you go. Buffalo and the Jets. Slog of a game. Rain that turned to snow. Mike White that turned to Joe Flacco, which turned back to Mike White. But not in time because Flacco lost a fumble when he got sacked, and he was 1 for 3 for a yard in that time when White was out. White went out twice, got hit in the ribs. After the game, his teammates were praising him for his toughness, and he was tough. I mean, I was just pleased because the Jets rallied for the cover. I was very happy with that one there. That was nice. They got it under 9. I set my line at 7 for this one. I was hoping to get the 7, but still, this was not a pretty game. And it wasn't expected to be. Both defenses are excellent.
Yeah, it really was ugly early on. I mean, the weather played a factor as well. Just a pretty ugly scene in Buffalo from a watchability standpoint. I mean, we began this game with I think it was 10 straight punts. No points on the board until a Buffalo touchdown late in the second quarter. It did feel like the Bills were in more control of this game. Even when it was close, even when it was 0-0, you kind of felt better about the way that they were moving the ball. But all of a sudden, coming out of halftime, the Jets marched down 10 plays, 72-yard drive to even this up. But really, really rough fumble, on a fumble sack in the third quarter. We saw Mike White take multiple monster hits in this game. He ended up in the hospital after the game, dealing with a rib injury. I mean, he got hit, went out for a play, looked like he was done, came back in, took another hard hit that ended up knocking him out of this game. But overall, I got to say that this game kind of shifted my opinion a little bit on Mike White, and didn't throw a touchdown, but he did get to 268 yards. He looked really tough, made some really difficult throws in the elements. And, I was a little bit hesitant to buy in. I think that big game against the Chicago Bears was pulling a lot of weight a couple of weeks ago. I thought he looked a little shaky last week against a better opponent, but this was impressive. Even in a loss, I thought Mike White looked really good.
Yeah, he did. He draws the Lions this upcoming week too, if he can play, if he's 100%. So I do, weather permitting, I do like Wilson. I like Elijah Moore this week. Corey Davis left with a concussion, so watch that one. I really like Moore if Davis doesn't play. He actually had the most targets. He had 10 targets this past week. Conklin actually had 8. He was active. Bam Knight over Michael Carter. That was a revelation that they like Bam Knight a lot. Carter only had 5 carries, didn't do much with them. He did have 3 catches at least, but I did start Carter in a couple places as a flex, thinking that maybe he'd be involved. Wasn't really that involved that much.
Yeah, I think if you're looking for rest of season, Knight's the guy with the higher upside at this point. And we saw, I mean, this split, if you're a Michael Carter owner, it's pretty concerning. I mean, Carter did outsnap Zonovan Knight 37-35. But was more kind of the third down pass catching back. I mean, he ran 26 routes on 37 snaps. Zonovan Knight, 17 carries to just 5 for Carter. And look, I mean, Knight is one of those guys that really passes the eye test. I mean, hard runner. Makes sense that he's nicknamed Bam for sure. And look, he's no Breece Hall, completely different type of player, but just a more dynamic runner, certainly, than Michael Carter. So I don't fault the Jets for turning in that direction. It was Knight that tacked on the touchdown in this game as well. Yeah, you mentioned Elijah Moore, 10 targets, caught 6 of those. Another decent game from Garrett Wilson, 6 for 78. I think, especially considering the opponent and considering the elements and the fact that your quarterback was banged up for half the game, still have to be really encouraged by what we're seeing out of Wilson.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. I think he's a start every week now, and especially this upcoming week. Bills, on the other hand, again, not a big game from Josh Allen. No. Only 147 passing yards. We know there's a tough opponent. He got sacked 3 times. He didn't have an interception, at least. No turnovers, but and Carter, by the way, did lose one. That's another reason why he probably got buried a little bit. But on the Bill side, though, I mean, they're not really connecting. This is the worst game for Stephon Diggs in a long time. 3 for 37. Dawson Knox had the 1 touchdown, 4 for 41. Gabe Davis did very little. And McKenzie did very little. The running backs did very little. We didn't see a whole lot of James Cook in this game after seeing a lot of them on the Thursday night game the week ago. This was not an encouraging offensive game. I think some of it has to do with the opponent, but they're not really firing on all cylinders offensively.
No, and it feels like you're picking nits sometimes with the Buffalo Bills, who just continue to do nothing but win games of late. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
for a team that we're trying to, it feels like everybody wants the Bills, to kind of be this dominant team. They're a really fun team when they're rolling. They're maybe the most fun team to watch when Josh Allen is at his peak. But it's been a long time since we've seen a complete 4-quarter domination by the
Right.
Buffalo Bills, where they've looked like that team where it's like, man, you don't want to face them. Especially if you're on the road in the playoffs. Like, to me, it's like the Eagles are that team at this point. And you could say maybe the schedule's been a little more friendly, whatever caveats you want to make, but they're the team that week in and week out is just rolling over opponents. And by the way, if you navigate over to RotoWire.com and you check out our NFL betting hub, I'm seeing Jalen Hurts now as a definitive MVP favorite, -175 at the DK Sportsbook. Patrick Mahomes, of course, 3 picks. We'll talk about that game in a bit. He's fallen back. And Josh Allen, I mean, he's not totally out of it, but he's all the way down at 20-1.
I would sprinkle that, as you like to say,
Mm.
because they're still the number 1 seed. They could turn it around pretty quickly. These things sometimes you go through a little stretch of doldrums, but we still have 4 more weeks of games. And if they're the number 1 seed going into the playoffs and they're dominant at the end, I can see it there. But yeah, I mean, I think Hurts is justifiably the favorite. I think Mahomes, I mean, let's face it. He had the picks, and those were bad. That last pick especially was bad because it kept the Broncos in the game. It was completely unnecessary to do that one. But nonetheless, I mean, he's been awesome all year without Tyreek Hill. Everyone is fearing a huge drop off, and it didn't really happen. You make a case for Burrow. Bengals still aren't even the division leader, though, so it's harder to make that case. But still, 5 wins in a row and they're rolling. So I can see the case for him. It's going to be a quarterback. I think we know that this year.
No question about that. It's a quarterback award at this point. I think it takes an unbelievably special season by a running back or a receiver. And then more importantly, you need there to be like no obvious elite quarterback, which given how many elite quarterbacks are in the league right now, I don't think that's happening anytime soon. I think the fact that Cooper Kupp was not really even a true MVP contender last year, like that's about as best of a case as you're ever going to get from a receiver. And
right.
Aaron Rodgers did not even have that dominant of a year, but compared to some of past MVP seasons. So if it couldn't happen last year, I think that was a pretty firm message that this is just a quarterback award going forward, and we have to accept that.
Yeah, I mean, you can argue that it's wrong that it's just a quarterback award because, I mean, that was a perfect storm because Stafford wasn't anything special. Kupp made Stafford, not the other way around.
100%.
And yeah, he still didn't get it because Jerry Rice never got an MVP award. I mean, that's the thing is if he can't get it, if Kupp's season last year can't get it, receivers aren't going to get
Fred
it.
Taylor never won one. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just a shame. I mean, you have seen a running back get it at least, though.
Right. Who was the last one? Adrian Peterson?
I think you're right. I'm not really good at my recall when it comes to MVPs, though. It's weird. I'm not wired that way. We are wired. We're on the Blue Wire Network.
Ooh.
Here's a couple of ads from the Blue Wire Network. Thank you for your indulgence. All of our podcasts are hosted on the Blue Wire Network. Let's move on to the next game, which happens to be the Cowboys barely pulling out a win over the Texans. You want to talk about, you're talking about the Raiders and embarrassing losses. The Cowboys were this close to having an embarrassing loss. That goal line stand against Houston was huge. That was the game right there. If they don't, because they go down 10 points that late, I don't think they come back.
I don't think so either. And I did not fault the Houston Texans for going for that.
Oh, I agree.
I don't think, tacking on the field goal there, I don't think it really matters. And given what Dallas did on the ensuing drive, it ultimately did not. The play calling was fairly disastrous, as it usually is for the Houston Texans. So Nothing really out of the ordinary there. I'm just shocked that Dallas suffered this level of a letdown. And, it had all the hallmarks, excuse me, multiple turnovers, muff punts. There has to be like at least one muff punt, it feels like, for an upset like this to potentially be brewing. But I looked it up. I did my research on this one. I was the only one on Staff Picks who took the Cowboys to cover that huge number. And I really did feel good about it. I mean, the last 10 home teams favored by at least 16.5 points were 7-3 ATS, 9-1 straight up. I'm like, all right, I'm following the numbers here. Dallas's defense, they're that type of defense that just relishes a matchup like this where you could feast against a bad quarterback. But man, it was such an unspirited effort by the Cowboys offense, especially kind of a lazy game, I felt like, from Dak Prescott
yes.
early on. And It did feel like all along Dallas was like, fine, I guess we'll try and win this game. And ultimately they did. And you got to give them some credit, I guess, for that. But man, it was just it was a game that they clearly did not take as seriously as they needed to. And in retrospect, a spot that maybe I should have seen coming as an obvious letdown.
I feel like sometimes when these teams descend, like are really farcical, they're really like a joke. The line accounts for that still, and we're like, well, it's above and beyond that. 17 points is a lot of points in the NFL, and still talking about professionals, all sorts of teams that could beat Bama, and that's the thing is, you want to say, oh, the Texans are 1-11-1, they'd get smoked. No, they've destroyed the best college team out there because they're all from the best college teams and they're grown-ass men. And that the thing is that that margin is just that tight. So that I feel like that's what we're looking at here. And I didn't get, if I had that gift of prophecy, I would get that in every game, but I feel like sometimes that doesn't get baked in. That's why I was on the Rams in the Thursday night game too. It doesn't always work out that way, as you alluded to. In fact, it usually doesn't, but I feel like there's that possibility at times. Pierce actually had Dameon Pierce actually had a decent game. Finally, 22 for 78. Now, not efficient, by the way, but a lot of his production was done early. He got stopped a couple of times on that goal line stand. Driscoll was the runner on the last one there. Just a horrific play on that fourth down. It's just, like you said, disastrous play call.
Yeah, again, I don't fault the idea of going for it there and really, kind of feeling like if you don't get a touchdown, Dallas has a good chance to score. And of course they did. But yeah, it was doomed from the start. You can kind of tell, like, and I believe they had called a timeout just before that. So you're like, I think Driscoll looked like maybe he had turned the wrong way on the handoff. Like, it's just classic. Like, this is why you're 1-11-1. It's plays like that that really add up in big spots over the course of the year. We should give credit. I mean, the Dallas defense, after playing a pretty rough game, especially in the first half, only allowed 3 points to Houston in the second half, forced a fumble on the first drive, had an interception late in the game to essentially seal it. But I mean, the Dallas offense, man, other than Tony Pollard making a few really nice plays, I mean, they really couldn't run the ball in this game, needed 31 carries to get to 127 yards on this Houston defense that every week we say the numbers tell us this is a very bad defense. This is a great spot for fantasy. And Zeke and Pollard both got in the end zone. That's all well and good. But yet again, kind of a surprisingly stout effort from this Houston defensive line.
Absolutely. Dallas, 0 sacks. I did not see that one coming. They did force the one interception by Mills. They did get the fumble recovery. So, I mean, it wasn't a total loss day for the Dallas defense, but they carried you last week against the Colts with that ridiculous fourth quarter. They let us down this week, which in a smash matchup there. But, that happens. I get it. Chris Moore, 10 for 124, was the only target really to speak of at all. By the way, Pierce got banged up a little bit. He was seen limping after the game. They said he had a bit of an ankle thing. So we're going to watch that this week. They get Kansas City this upcoming week. The Texans do. So it might be, Benjamin, might be Burkhead, might be Ogunbowale. They all got action. None of them did a darn thing when they were in there. But it's worth noting that those would be who their pivots are. It might not just necessarily be Burkhead. It might be like a 3-headed monster.
Yeah, and I might find myself in a similar situation having to pick that game this coming week. I haven't looked at the line quite yet, but I assume that'll be I don't know if it's going to be all the way up at 17 or 17 and a half. That game is in Houston, but yeah, I mean, I think especially with the Chiefs coming off of what felt like somewhat of a letdown spot this past week, Texans are going to be in trouble, to say the least.
Yeah.
One last note on this game: Amari Rodgers rising from the ashes, left for dead by the Green Bay Packers. One of the more disappointing players in recent memory for Green Bay. Had a couple of really nice plays in this game. Nice kind of contested touchdown catch. Probably pretty easily the best game of his NFL career by default. Scored his first NFL touchdown. So
That's
not
true.
really something you could bank on. Not somebody who's probably going to be in any fantasy lineups going forward, but an interesting name to monitor, at least for a guy who had a decent amount of hype coming out of Clemson.
For sure. Also had a carry in there as well.
Yeah.
I get Amari and Amani Rodgers mixed up every single time, by the way. Amari is the wide receiver. So good for him. Dallas side, CeeDee Lamb, 5 for 33, only 6 targets. Speaks to the whole Dak malaise. It was Dalton Schultz that was getting all the targets. Tony Pollard got the receiving touchdown in this one. Dak had two picks, got sacked once. Yeah, I mean, they ran the ball okay, but not great. They averaged 4 yards a carry. I mean, they didn't really necessarily do anything quite all that well offensively. They did okay.
Mm-hmm.
Enough to get by.
I think that's the perfect way to put it. Not a good Dak game. Watching this game too, I think everybody pretty much agrees at this point. Like, Tony Pollard is just so much better than Ezekiel Elliott, and Zeke still has his role. He's still a really good power back, finishing runs. He had the game-winning touchdown. But man, Tony Pollard is just a special runner. Like, just the way he moves, like, really jumps off the screen. I was kind of captivated by it watching this game. I mean, even the way he's kind of sidestep, tiptoeing his way into the end zone on one of those touchdowns down the sideline. I mean, he's really, really special. And I think the Cowboys it's such a luxury to basically have this guy that you're using as your number one, sometimes your number two back, who I think for 25 to 27 other teams is the clear number one.
For sure. 100%. Oh man, that's very handy coming into the playoffs for them. Let's do one more game before we do our next read, and let's do Lions versus the Vikings. This one's interesting here. The Lions started off as the Vikings -3. It went all the way to Lions -2.5. Though it should have gone more. I was wrong. This is I was 8-4 this week. I was pretty good. This is one I got egregiously wrong. There's another that was my best bet. I got egregiously wrong. The Lions were the best team the whole game through on this one. There was no doubt about it. The Lions were the better team.
Yep, I was with you on this one. I took the Vikings. I tried to zag. It felt like all this momentum is on Detroit, and despite kind of doing the research, and every number will point to the fact that Minnesota is nowhere near an elite team. I just kind of felt like there was too much of a swell in favor of Detroit. But like you said, this was a game that they owned from the jump. We saw both teams fail to score on their opening drives, and after that, Jamison Williams, first career touchdown, wide open, 41-yarder. And from then on, it was kind of off to the races for Detroit, although Minnesota did come down and answer with a really nice long drive. Dalvin Cook ended up running in a short touchdown there. So I kind of thought we would get a little bit more of a back and forth game. And I guess technically that was the case. But like you said, I mean, it really felt like Detroit was in control of this game. And there were a few times where Minnesota, it's like, all right, if they can, they score, if they can get a stop here, they'll be in good shape. But they scored a touchdown to make it 21-13. They went for 2, didn't get it. I know that's the analytics play. And they really needed a stop at that point. This was nearing the end of the third quarter, and they just couldn't get it. I mean, Detroit converted multiple, I think they only faced actually 1 third down on the drive, but it was just methodically down the field. And, to me, obviously, if you're Minnesota, you'd like to score more than 23 points on the Detroit Lions defense. It was kind of Justin Jefferson and everybody else for this day. We should mention 11 for 223. For Justin Jefferson. That was a new career high. I mean, my goodness, I believe that was a Vikings team record as well. But defensively, I thought the Vikings just didn't really look like anything special. They had a ton of trouble slowing down this Detroit offense. I mean, the Lions converted 7 third downs. They converted a 4th down as well, ran almost 70 plays. I mean, they were approaching 500 yards of total offense in this game. So if I'm Minnesota and I'm trying to convince myself that I'm a real contender, I'm going to win the division, I'm getting a home playoff game, the defense is what I feel like I need to clean up more than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Lions punted twice. They even missed a field goal, but it could have been even worse. But yeah, they just could not stop the Lions. I mean, Kirk Cousins threw for 425 yards. That should be a good day, but he didn't get picked. He did get sacked 3 times. Dalvin Cook. So the Lions shot themselves in the foot. Remember, Dalvin Cook had the fumble where he was going to be a passer on that one there, and that was a killer play. They just had these bad plays at the wrong time. TJ Hawkinson with just a awful drop on a 3rd down play, and then he lost a fumble later on. So he had some critically bad plays there too. He still went 6 for 77, but you'll remember those bad plays. The only thing that was annoying was that it was Thielen, it was Osborne getting the touchdowns. It wasn't Jefferson. Annoying for me because I have Jefferson everywhere.
Yeah, that's been the thing. I mean, Jefferson, for how valuable he's been in terms of catches and yards, like the touchdowns haven't quite been there to the level that you would expect. But with all due respect to your guy Jamar Chase and to Stephon Diggs and Devontae Adams, man, watching Jefferson week to week, I mean, I think he's on kind of a slight level up from the rest of those guys. I mean, just the the contested catches alone are just unbelievable. I can't really remember anybody in recent years who, in what seems like a 50-50 ball. I mean, I've said it before. I mean, it feels like 90-10 with him. He catches absolutely everything. 11 on 15 targets, 223. I mean, he's the best receiver in the league, and I don't really think it's all that close.
Yeah, in that perspective, it's almost like 15 targets is light. You're like, come on, throw him more. But that's ridiculous also. So, at the same time, Lions, they split up the carries again. The backfield was a three-headed monster between Williams, Swift, and Justin Jackson. Only one of the three that got the touchdown. There wasn't, the Lions ran the ball okay, 30 times for 134. It just was dispersed. The Vikings couldn't run the ball at all. Cook, 15 for 23. Just awful game for him. He got the touchdown that saved his game, but was not a good fantasy game, and you expected a lot more out of him.
Absolutely. I mean, maybe we should have known. I mean, Detroit's defense set the tone on that first Minnesota drive. They go for it on a 4th and 1 around the 40-yard line, and Dalvin Cook is just stacked up right away. And I think that was kind of a harbinger for how the rest of that day would look for Dalvin Cook. I mean, salvaged it, I guess, with a touchdown, but still pretty disappointing overall. Just one catch for 13 yards. And, Detroit did rush for 134 yards, like you said, but big chunk of those came on a CJ Moore gadget play that they ran another reverse to Amon-Ra St. Brown for a first down.
Yeah,
that was key in the second half. I was over on Prize Picks yesterday. Took the Moore on DeAndre Swift. Didn't quite get there. Thought he would be a little bit more involved in this game. Had 3 catches for 18 yards, but just 6 for 21 for him. And like you said, the snap count was very, very evenly distributed for Detroit. 26 for Jamal Williams, 25 for Swift. We saw a lot of Justin Jackson in this game as well.
Ball carrier.
Yep.
We always call him Justin Jackson, ball carrier at Northwestern. So there you go. I like Justin Jackson, but from a fantasy perspective, I didn't like seeing him get the touchdown, but I'm happy for him. It is Victory Monday, so we got to break down Nick's triumphant win for his Jaguars. Before we do that, real quick, a note from our sponsors at No House Advantage, who have been sponsoring us all season long. No House Advantage is changing the game by offering the most dynamic fantasy sports platform available today. You can play in pick'em contests versus other people for the shot at winning big cash prizes. Download the app, choose a contest, select your player props, earn points for correct picks, and climb the leaderboard for your shot at hundreds of thousands of dollars every week. You can also test your skills versus the house and 20 times your entry if you hit all of your picks. Bet on up to 5 player prop over-unders or individual player matchups across every major sports league, including NFL, NBA, MLB, PGA, MMA, and NASCAR. Sign up now with promo code NHAWIRE. That's NHAWIRE at nohouseadvantage.com or download the app on the app stores to get a first deposit match up to $25. Make sure to check out No House Advantage today and experience daily fantasy sports redefined, because it's not just how you play, but also where you play. You won't want to miss out on this. All right, we don't want to miss out on Nick's triumphant analysis on the Titans, also known as Evan Engram Day. What a wild day on people's benches in a lot of cases.
I'll tell you what, in the one league that I own, Evan Engram, he was in my starting lineup. I'm still going to lose the matchup somehow. Almost 40 fantasy points for Evan Engram, 11 for 162 and 2 touchdowns on 15 targets. Easily the best game of his NFL career. In the first quarter, this looked like it was going to be same old Jags Titans, 10th year in a row, losing at Tennessee. They hadn't won there since 2013. Jags fall behind early. It's just disastrous. They go 3 and out on their first drive. Tennessee marches right down 10 plays. Derrick Henry's running all over them. But for the second time in 3 weeks, we've seen just the kind of resilience and the kind of comebacks that you don't normally expect from the Jacksonville Jaguars, forcing turnovers. There's a huge fumble by Derrick Henry after a long run. Ball just kind of pops right into the arms of Josh Allen. A big strip sack by the rookie Trayvon Walker. That was huge as well. I did think at one point, Jeff, the Jags were +3 in the turnover margin. We're still down. I'm like, are they really going to do this like twice in 4 weeks? Are they going to find a way to be +3 and still lose the game? But this was an incredible game. I mean, Trevor Lawrence looked amazing. He wasn't outright bad last week against Detroit. I think a lot of things went wrong in that blowout loss. He wasn't great, but I don't think he was the primary culprit. But especially coming into this week, dealing with the sore knee, dealing with the toe injury, didn't practice for half the week. He goes 30 for 42, 368, and 3 touchdowns. I'm starting to get really excited, dangerously excited about what the future could hold with Trevor Lawrence. Fantasy wise, though, not a great day. If you needed a big day from Christian Kirk, a pretty horrific day from Travis Etienne, who is just killing me in a couple leagues these last few weeks. He had a Dalvin Cookie and 17 carries for 32 yards.
But the thing is, as our friend Tom Kesnick pointed out, it was inches away from being a salvageable day. He gets stopped like just on like the 6-inch line, and then Trevor Lawrence got the quarterback sneak for the touchdown. Yeah. I mean, he gets the touchdown. It's a different day for him, and you're fine with it. You're not happy, but you're fine. But the weird part is he's not getting involved in the passing game. This is one of those things that I expected all along. Like, okay, he was a great pass catcher at Clemson. He worked together with Lawrence. They know each other. How is he not more involved in the passing game?
It's shocking, and I think that was a big part of the appeal when you draft Travis Etienne. Is there's a reason this guy gets Alvin Kamara comps. It's because you don't necessarily have to be running him into the line. I think there's an argument to be made that he's more effective catching those swing passes, catching those screens, and he doesn't have more than 3 catches in any game this season, which is surprising. And even the targets haven't really been there. He had a couple 5-target games, but for the most part, it's just been 2 or 3 short passes. I mean, he has only 6 total catches over his last 4 games. He's averaging like 5 fantasy points per game in that span. So it's been ugly. I mean, he's gone touchdown-less now in 4 straight games.
Yeah, very frustrating. Yeah. I guess it's kind of a rookie wall. He didn't have his rookie season, so maybe that's it a little bit. I don't know, but nonetheless, though, I mean, Ingram went nuts. Your pass catchers just exploit the Titans. I mean, the thing is, though, like you said, it was a weird fancy day. Christian Kirk didn't do much. Zay Jones did his 8 for 77 and a touchdown, 12 targets for him, 15 for Ingram. I mean, the thing is, credit Lawrence. He saw a matchup that he could exploit, and he went back to the well over and over again, and it worked. The second touchdown was just a circus catch by Ingram.
Oh, yeah. Typical Evan Ingram.
Yeah. Well, and actually, Zay Jones's catch was crazy too.
Yeah.
In fact, it was ruled not a touchdown, right? And then they had to review it, and he got the score after the fact. And it was inside the 2-minute warning, so they had to kind of take their time, make sure the wait to play, and call the next play so that the booth would review it, because it's not automatically reviewed when it's already, So that was tricky, but it worked. Just a weird game because Tennessee was gashing him in the first quarter.
Right.
Henry got almost 100 in the first quarter alone.
Yeah, I mean, he had 119 of his 121 were in the first half. I mean, it really was the turnovers that switched everything for Tennessee. Yep. I mean, they were dominating this game in terms of yardage, in terms of time of possession early on. Even when the Jags put together some decent drives, they had to settle for a couple of field goals in the second quarter that at the time felt big. But I mean, if you're Tennessee, like they went up 14-7 in this game and then had a turnover, a 3-and-out, and another turnover on their next 3 drives, and still led this game. I mean, it wasn't until just at the end of the half that the Jags finally were able to kind of capitalize on all these turnovers. That's when we had the Zay Jones touchdown to finally go up 20-14. But even at that point, it felt like Tennessee had been the better team. Obviously, some momentum was starting to build for the Jags. But I think if you're the Titans coming out of half, you're like, look, if we don't turn it over 3 times, we're going to be okay here. But whatever momentum the Jaguars picked up on that final drive just really carried over. I mean, 2 touchdowns coming right out of the half. And all of a sudden, in a blink of an eye, this felt like a game that the Titans were going to run away with. Derrick Henry was going to have 200 rushing yards. It was going to be just another one of those days. And it completely flipped. And I mean, this game was basically over midway through the third quarter. I mean, the Titans were getting booed off the field at home.
Yeah. 4 sacks, the 4 turnovers. Trayvon Walker have a day. He looked good.
He looked awesome.
That was a huge play. Like you said, Henry's second fumble was huge too. That pretty much finished him off. And then, they were driving to try to get a late score, a second late score, but whatever. It was way too little too late. I gotta say the lack of pass catchers still makes, no Treylon Burks made a huge difference for Tennessee. Robert Woods just doesn't, he's not back. He's not fully back, or maybe, and he also wasn't a super crazy athletic receiver to begin with also. So, expecting a whole lot out of him is probably folly, but nonetheless, he's just not that guy. Let's move on. Philly and the Giants. This one was over quick. Philly just blammed them really hard right away. That fourth down play to get the to Devontae Smith. I mean, that pretty much that indicated where the game was going there. They got, not only did they get the first down, but it was a touchdown. It's 14-0 after that. They turn around and get a quick, a turnover, or no, the weird punt play. I'm sorry. And a 33-yard touchdown right after that. All of a sudden it's 21-0. Game over.
Completely over. Yep. I think this is a game that, if you read articles or listened to podcasts coming into the week, a lot of people thought this would be a low scoring game. I think there's a lot of faith in the Giants defense. The weather out in New Jersey kind of slowing things down and making this a little bit more of a grind. And, the line implied that as well. I think Vegas saw this as a 1-score game with the Eagles being on the road. But like I said at the top, I mean, the Eagles are the team that is making these statement wins. We're trying to decide who's the best team in the league, who should be the Super Bowl favorite. All the Eagles are doing right now is just crushing opponents, just bludgeoning them in the first half. I mean, how many times this year have the Eagles felt like they're cruising to a victory by halftime? I mean, 5, 6, 7 times. I mean, it's unbelievable. Yeah. This team, they just kind of avoid close games. They had the scare against Indy. They had the loss to Washington. Those are really the only 2 spots all year. I guess you could go back to the Arizona game in week 5. Other than that, I mean, these have been convincing win after convincing win after convincing win. And I mean, they've scored 40, 35, and 48 points now in 3 straight wins over Green Bay, Tennessee, and the Giants. They're at Chicago next week. That should be another really good spot for this Eagles team. At Dallas, week 16. That's going to be massive. That could ultimately end up deciding the division. And then after that, Saints and Giants again. So, I mean, they're on paper, they really only have one more difficult game remaining. And I think if I'm Philly, I feel the best about my position compared to any of the other elite teams in the league. I know Cincinnati's clicking. I know Dallas keeps winning, but Philly to me has been the most convincing of the elite teams by a pretty good margin, at least over the last month.
Yeah, and it's unfolded nicely too, that they're in a position where they can be comfortable in terms of like their record versus everybody else. Yes, Dallas could get it to within 1 game if they beat them head to head, but having the multiple game cushion too is awfully handy. It doesn't look like, there's one other dominant team perhaps in the NFC, and that's the Niners. And the Niners lost their quarterback. And we'll see. They might have lost their quarterback after their quarterback. They might be down to their 4th string next week there if Purdy's oblique injury is an issue. And they play Thursday night too, so that's something to watch for there. But yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's everything's worked out for them. The Rams have fallen apart. The Packers have fallen apart. The Vikings have been exposed as not that great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I do keep returning to the playoff machine, by the way, and like trying to find the machinations that could get the Packers into the playoffs. And even the Jags, by the way, are only 2 games back with the tiebreaker now in the AFC South. They have like a 15% chance to sneak into this. So the door's not closed. But no, you're right on Philly. I mean, it is a year where it feels like a lot has gone right for the Eagles. The Dallas Goedert injury, that's big. We'll see when they get him back. Obviously, Gardner Johnson's on IR. Other positive injury news for Philly, by the way, Lane Johnson, who went out of this game with an abdominal injury, maybe looked like it was going to be something pretty serious at first. They're saying he avoided anything major and he's just day-to-day, so might not end up missing any time at all.
Yeah, that would be good. The Giants, Barkley only went 9 for 28. He was dealing with a neck. In fact, was a game time decision. Did have 2 catches for 20 yards also, and sat out a lot of the second half. And they said it wasn't a re-injury. It's just a game situation. The fact that they were getting blown out. But still, you hate seeing that there. If you have Barkley, I mean, you've gotten diminishing returns lately as he started to get banged up over the course of the season. That's only natural, especially when you look at the lack of playmakers in that Giants offense. You know that they're always focusing on Barkley.
Yeah, he never looked right to me in this game. I mean, only played 20 snaps. I think once it got out of hand, that was basically curtains for his day. Rough timing, fantasy-wise, that's for sure. I mean, didn't really get anything going on his 9 carries, just 28 yards. Did have 2 catches for 20 yards, but if you needed a big Barkley day in fantasy, even with a neck injury, it was kind of a tough spot, not to start him, right? I mean, chances are you didn't have, too many great options with 6 teams on bye. But yeah, I mean, this was overall just a disaster day for the New York Giants, who all of a sudden, I mean, it feels like next week against the Commanders, the rematch from week 13, like that's a borderline must win for the New York Giants when they start to look ahead at their postseason chances kind of slipping away before their eyes.
Yeah, huge game, huge game. And yeah, you're right. That is going to be a monster game for both of them. The Commanders gained by not playing this week, seeing some of their contenders fall by the wayside there a little bit, or not fall by the wayside, but drop back a little bit. The Commanders are currently the 6 seed. The Giants are still currently the 7 because the Seahawks lost.
Ooh.
Do we have to start taking the Lions' playoff chances seriously here? By the way, they're 6-7 now, and they're playing as good as any non-elite team out there.
I think we do. I mean, you look at 538; they have a 20% chance to get into the playoffs. This is the team that was, of course, 1-6 at one point. I mean, if you're just looking at like NFC teams, let's say over the last 5 or 6 weeks, which conveniently is when Detroit has taken off, it's like I think Philly and Dallas, yeah, those are still two teams that are playing better. But like Detroit has played better than Minnesota. They've played better than Green Bay. They've played better than any team in the NFC South. And I think they've played better than Seattle, Arizona, and the Rams. I mean, there's a case to be made that they are the 4th best team, or at least the 4th most dangerous team in the NFC.
Yeah, that's right. So, and looking at the Lions' schedule, obviously we talked about they face the Jets on the road. So it could have a comeuppance as early as this week on Saturday here, or not Saturday. They're on Sunday. But then at Panthers, home against the Bears, and at the Packers, and that could be a Jordan Love game.
It could be a Jordan Love game. It could also be a play-in game for the 6 or the 7 seed, depending on what happens. True. I mean, if Green Bay gets the Rams this week on Monday, the Baker Mayfield Rams coming in hot, I get that. Green Bay should win that game. They should at least feel good about winning that game at home. At Miami on Christmas Day, that to me, if Green Bay finds a way to beat the Dolphins on Christmas, this is going to get really, really, really interesting because, Washington, depending on like one of Washington and the Giants is probably getting in. Whoever loses that game next week is going to be in trouble. Seattle feels like it's fading. And obviously Green Bay, gets a rematch with Detroit at home in week 18. So I think if you're Green Bay and Detroit, I wouldn't say you feel good about your chances. You still need some help, but based on how the schedules line up for the teams that you're trying to catch in the NFC, like it's really not completely out of the question. And especially with Green Bay, I mean, we'll talk about Miami at the end of the pod, but I mean, this is a Dolphins team that I think has some pretty serious concerns on offense with how Tua's looked the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, with all their injuries too.
Yeah.
It's clear that they're in a world of hurt. Let's get the one last game from the afternoons, the early slate. Talk a little Ravens and Steelers. There's a reason why we weren't so eager to get to this one. Backup quarterback fest. Kenny Pickett got hurt really early on the first drive, came back for one drive, and then was ruled out with a concussion the rest of the way. We'll know if we'll see him next week, but Trubisky came in, had the one touchdown, but 3 picks. There's a reason why he lost the job to Pickett.
He was so bad. And I took the Steelers in this game. I felt good about it. As soon as Trubisky came in, I knew I was cooked. I mean, he had 3 interceptions on 4 drives. I mean, it was interception, punt, interception. And luckily Baltimore couldn't really do anything during that time. They, on those 4 ensuing drives, they only scored 3 points. So it was still a game, but man, Pittsburgh, I mean, with Trubisky, it's like, yeah, I guess give him some credit for being willing to take shots, but man, I mean, those were 3 bad picks, really not overly catchable balls, just kind of throwing away drives when Pittsburgh was at least in position to get some points. So I thought in a lot of ways, Trubisky kind of threw them out of this game, a game that their defense played well enough to win. Pickett, though, I mean, you kind of knew it right away watching that game. Like he took a really hard hit from Roquan Smith, kind of like a rollout type of play. And Smith, kind of turned him over and wasn't quite a body slam, but I wouldn't have been shocked if they threw an unnecessary roughness flag with how hard he was slammed to the ground. But
that was a worse hit than the one in the Sunday night game for sure.
Way worse. Yeah. And I get it. When you're kind of flushed out of the pocket and when you're on the move, there are different rules. But man, yeah, that was a big time hit. And you could tell right away Pickett had some sort of issue with his shoulder or his rib, the way he hit the ground. But yeah, disappointing result if you were on the Steelers, that's for sure. But I mean, here we go again with the Ravens, right? Like all the Bengals are doing lately is winning and convincing us that they're a Super Bowl contender. And yet they can't even create any distance in their own division because the Ravens, despite playing like objectively bad football for the last month, are 3-1 with their 3 wins coming in games where they've scored 13, 10, and 16 points.
Right. They keep winning ugly. And it's getting frustrating because the Bengals, on paper, they've been more impressive, but guess what? That doesn't matter. And Baltimore gets Cleveland this upcoming week on the road. That's a winnable game for them, although God knows who's going to be their quarterback. It's probably not going to be Lamar. Earlier reports like on Saturday were suggesting Lamar was not going to come back till week 16. Yep. Tyler Huntley left with a concussion. They brought in Anthony Brown. And And they also didn't they add Brett Hundley too? It's like they have Tyler Huntley and Brett Hundley, and
It's confusing.
It's so confusing. And not a lick of offense here on the passing game. They did have J.K. Dobbins had himself a game. The funny thing is, lots of people are like, "Oh, he doesn't look great. He doesn't look himself." He went 15 for 120.
I ripped off a long run in the second half of this game. It's like, yeah, some running backs finished that off for a touchdown. I think he looked a little slow, I guess, if that's the criticism, but that's also what you get with a back who could break tackles and could be a bruiser. So, I mean, not everybody, could be Saquon Barkley, where it feels like you could do both. So, yeah,
I heard some James Robinson comps.
I saw that tweet as well. I pretty apt, actually. Although Robinson, when he gets in the open field, I think he's a little bit faster than he gets credit for. Either way, 15 for 120 and a score for J.K. Dobbins. I mean, that went about as well as it possibly could have. You mentioned, Huntley, very, very limited in this game, 8 of 12 for 88 yards, actually went out in the second half. He took a hit of his own, got smacked by Micah Fitzpatrick, a play that also could have been flagged, was not. I mean, it ultimately was a clean hit, but it didn't look like a clean hit in real time. So we saw Anthony Brown, of all people, a rookie out of Oregon, come in and finish this game out for the Baltimore Ravens.
Yep, exactly. Gus Edwards actually looked good in this one too, 13 for 66. So the running game was massive. They ran for over 200 yards. Yeah. That was, and they had to, because the passing game wasn't going to do a whole lot. Pittsburgh, Mike Tomlin's never had a losing season. I think I've heard that a couple of times this year. They can't lose another game. They are 5-8. So one more loss and he'll have his first losing season. It's also a first season he's had to replace the quarterback in a long time too. So those things are probably interconnected a little bit there. And they've been dealing with some really bad quarterback play. Like you said, all 3 interceptions were in Ravens territory. 2 with easy and field goal range. They also had a field goal blocked in this game. And then the last one was 1st and 10, but it was like from the 40, but his 1st and 10, it was a force into double coverage. Just didn't need to make that throw. And there's a reason why he's a former Bears and former Bills quarterback.
I know. As a Steelers bettor, it was just awful. They should have won this game. I felt like it was the right side. If you go back, especially with losing Huntley late, you're thinking, all right, maybe this is finally the break that they need. But offensively, just disaster. Disaster for the Steelers, who could not run the ball. I mean, you said it with the Bengals were able to run all over this Steelers defense, over 5 yards per carry. They had 12 first downs via the rushing. The Steelers had 3 rushing first downs. But the Steelers also had 16 passing first downs. So it was kind of a complete reversal. Where like the Steelers, I think, would have loved to play this game the exact way that the Ravens did, but they just can't move the ball. I mean, 20 carries for 65 yards for the Steelers offense. Another just wildly inefficient day for Najee Harris.
Yeah, it was. It really was. After a few good ones in a row, too. So we're starting to get optimistic about him, and it didn't happen. Jeff Johnson asks, do you start J.K. Dobbins over Saquon this upcoming week? I know it's early to do start him, sit him, but I'm intrigued. I'll have to think about it because I want to see more practice reports on Saquon. Huge game coming up for the Giants in this one here. But I guess this is the time of year where they're all huge. But Dobbins gets a great matchup against Cleveland. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, that's it. I think that might break the tie for you. If Saquon Barkley is still limited next week in any way, I think I would lean toward J.K. Dobbins. I really would. And I think if Lamar Jackson's probably not back for next week, I think that helps J.K. Dobbins. I think they keep it on the ground even more. And I think the Ravens winning this game maybe feels like it buys Lamar a little bit more time, right? If he was maybe a true 50-50 for week 15, I think the fact that you came away from this game with a win, you don't really feel like you need to push Lamar to come back until he's fully ready.
Yeah, for sure. And even if they, right now they're tied for the division with the Bengals, but 9-4. I mean, they're in really good shape. They get one more win, they're basically in. So the way it's lining up with all these other teams knocking each other off. The Steelers face the Panthers. We're going to talk about the Panthers win over Seattle in a second. But first, a quick note from our sponsors at Monkey Knife Fight. Football is officially back on Monkey Knife Fight with all the NFL action that you're looking for. And if college football is more your speed, they've got plenty of that too. On Monkey Knife Fight, there's no sharks, no salary caps, and no math. It's just easy to play, easy to win, daily fantasy player props. Join now at monkeyknifefight.com and you'll get your first game free. Then use promo code RWNFL to get your first deposit matched instantly up to $100. So, what are you waiting for? Join Monkey Knife Fight today. Nick Whalen and I here breaking down week 14, and let's talk Carolina. This is one of the games I got wrong. I thought Seattle would handle Carolina. I thought they'd be able to move the ball pretty well. I mean, the fact is that they really embrace the whole concept that running backs don't matter by having Travis Homer and as their only running back and only giving him 9 carries. Tony Jones got 1. Geno Smith had a bad day early on. He got his fantasy production late in this one here, but early on he threw 2 bad picks, and that was big. Carolina jumped off to a pretty big lead in this one.
Yeah, Geno threw a pick on his first attempt at the game. That was after a long drive by Carolina resulted in a field goal. But it feels like this is now the 3rd or 4th week in a row where Geno started slow, really going all the way back to that Germany game against Tampa Bay. And for the 4th week in a row, he's been able to salvage a decent fantasy day because he's piling up yards. They're playing from behind. He threw 3 touchdowns in this one, but yeah, it reminded me kind of the Geno that we saw against the Rams, the Geno we saw against the Raiders, the Geno we saw against Tampa, where the ultra clean play that we were getting from Geno when the Seattle was really rising in kind of the early middle portion of the season. That's faded away a little bit. And we do need to credit this Carolina defense, which has been way better than people expect throughout the entire season. I don't think it's gotten the credit that it deserves, but Geno just wasn't good. He wasn't great in this game, especially early on. There were 2 more plays that could have been picks. Like J.C. Horn could have had 4 interceptions in this game. There were 2 that he picked off just out of bounds. Did have a late one that I think he didn't think was an interception until he saw the replay, and it was. But overall, this was a game that Carolina completely controlled. They went up 10-0. They went up 17-0. And Seattle, credit to them for making this a 1-score game for most of the second half, but they couldn't really stop the run when they needed to. And once Carolina went back up by 2 scores with about 7 minutes left, Seattle had a chance to answer, and they went with a quick 3 and out. I mean, that kind of told you all you needed to. And we talked about the Giants kind of fading at the wrong time. It feels like Seattle's going down that same path. Yeah,
2 scores down, 7 minutes left. I understand field position sucks and all that, but I don't know if you can punt, especially with the way defense playing the way your defense is playing. I thought it was pretty much kind of game over after that point in time. Yeah. I understand. I mean, they were it was 4th and 8 at their 27, but like you said, they're already down 27-17. Carolina got another field goal there. Yes, Seattle drove for a touchdown, but then they had to try to win it. If you're needing an onside kick to be really within a score, you're not within a score. And it was 1 play after that after the onside kick. So yeah, Carolina, first road win for them. They're up to 5-8. They're not dead yet. They got this slim chance of being able to get to win the NFC South. And they're not completely dead in the wild card either. They're kind of in the Packers range there, but they've got the tiebreak over Atlanta. I think they've got a game against the Bucs coming up. And they beat the Bucs earlier, like a drum.
Yep, exactly.
So they're not dead. They get the Steelers, the Lions, the Bucs, and the Saints. I know we're talking about Carolina here, but that's not a bad schedule.
They're not dead by any means. And I think it's going to get really interesting if they find a way to beat Pittsburgh next week. And that game is at home. They get Detroit at home as well before they finish at Tampa and at New Orleans, because Tampa Bay, they get the Bengals in week 15 like that. I don't know if that's a winnable game right now for the Buccaneers. And we'll get to that game in a sec. I mean, this is a really bad football team, and a team that's lucky to still have a 1-game lead, if we're being honest, because a week ago they had one of the all-time steals, in that game against New Orleans. So I think it could be even more precarious for Tampa Bay. But if you're just talking, I just by the eye test, Carolina to me looks like a better team. There's nothing about the rosters that say Carolina should be a better team than Tampa, but they look like a better team. They play a more confident style. Yeah, they play better. They play with more confidence. They can actually run the ball. That is not something you could say about Tampa whatsoever. And Carolina remains committed to the run. They were not gashing Seattle in this game by any means. Raheem Blackshear, I think he was responsible for their longest run on the day outside of Sam Darnold, who had a long scramble.
Oh, yeah, that was a wild scramble. Yeah, too.
Yeah, it was Hubbard and Foreman over and over and over, just kind of battering this Seattle defense. They weren't ripping off. There wasn't like a 40-yard gain or a 50-yard touchdown. I mean, Hubbard and Foreman just over and over were able to pound this Seattle defense into submission. And I don't think Tampa's not capable of doing that. They haven't shown that kind of commitment, and I don't think they have the offensive line to do it either. So, Carolina, Tampa, if you have to pick between those teams, like if it comes down to that Week 17 game, like I think I like Carolina to beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers right now.
Yeah, I could see it. I could definitely see it there. All four teams in the NFC South are -30 or worse in point differential. They're just different ways. I mean, Tampa's only scored 224 points all year. It's just a depressing offense. The Rams are worse, but they still found a way to be worse than that. But yeah, Denver's obviously at another level. Although we'll get to that. They actually showed life. It's weird. But yeah, and for Seattle, I feel like this stretch is illustrated to them that, okay, the air's kind of coming out of the bubble a little bit there, out of the balloon, excuse me. You're realizing that Geno Smith isn't a long-term answer. He's a great story, but he's just a average quarterback. I don't think there's a level in him that makes him like a playoff quarterback. He maybe qualify for the playoffs, but you're never going to be this like elite team with him.
Yeah, I think that's becoming clear. And, we were talking about him as like this fringe feel good MVP candidate, midway through the season. And I think now that we're getting kind of a full 18 game sample of Geno Smith, I think we're going to kind of come back to the same conclusion that we've had about him for most of his career. It still feels like he's taken a step up in terms of his confidence, in terms of how he'll be viewed going forward. But yeah, if you're Seattle, I don't think you necessarily look at this as a situation and say like, yep, we're good at quarterback for the next 5 to 7 years.
Right. Exactly there. So they're 7-6. They're hanging on for dear life in the playoff race. They play the Niners on Thursday night, hosted the Niners. Niners smoked them in the first game, but it's a short turnaround, and who knows who the Niners QB is going to be, but still, it's a massive game. And I almost wonder if there's a little look ahead by the Seahawks too. Not that they're a team that can afford to look ahead, but you had a road game against the Rams last week, a Thursday night game this upcoming week against the Niners. Panthers coming to town. They're 4-8. You think that they're just, doing their thing. And they got punched in the mouth a little bit there. And it started with just how the game started, I think. And I think they just too little too late for them.
Yeah, last thing I'll say on Seattle, I mean, it's going to get really dicey for them. They need Detroit to keep losing, or to start losing, I should say. They need Green Bay to fall off. They basically need all these other NFC teams to struggle in the same way they have, because they get the 49ers, and then they're at the Chiefs, and then they're home for the Jets. Ooh. I mean, that is a really tough 3-game stretch. They'll be home dogs this week. They'll be big time dogs at Kansas City in week 16. And we'll see what the Jets do these next couple of weeks, but that could be a pick 'em. They could maybe even be slight home dogs in that game, going up against that Jets defense. So they need to find a way to win at least one of those 3 games, probably 2 of those 3, to feel good about their chances. And that's a lot to ask. I don't, on paper, I don't think you see Seattle beating the 49ers or the Chiefs, especially. So they need to figure out a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. They're going to need some help too, it sounds like. So maybe some dicey times coming ahead. But, when you look at like their expectation going into the season, it's already been a great year. I mean, that's the thing that's kind of like, what sort of mindset do you have? Like, now that you've gotten this far, you're not satisfied with that though either. It's a tricky spot. All right, Chiefs, Broncos. This was 2 games, completely 2 different games. 27-0 all of a sudden becomes 27-14 at the half. All of a sudden becomes 27-21. And now that you're hold on your butts time, they get the score to go up 34-21. Then the Broncos get another one after ripping. Russell Wilson actually played well at times, and then had a nasty concussion on that run. I guess that they were saying it was his first concussion, which is just mind-boggling to me that any NFL player, you can say that about any football player this far in their career. Right. But he was diving for a first down and took a really hard hit off the ground. He looked terrible. We may not see him this week, but this was he was running a lot in this game. 4 for 57. This was old Russell Wilson, not an old Russell Wilson, but the vintage Russell Wilson.
Yeah, he was. I thought pretty bad early in this game. He was. He had the pick 6 that put KC up 27-0, which, by the way, the Chiefs not covering a game that they led 27-0. That might be a worse beat than anything we had this week, at least for me. I don't know what side of this game you were on, but I was on the Chiefs 9.5. I
was too.
I mean, felt like
I was feeling pretty damn good about that.
Right. And I mean, there were even multiple times in the second half where you're like, all right, fine. They're up 2 scores. We'll be okay here. Nope. Really rough game from Mahomes. I mean, the total yardage looks good. The 3 touchdowns look good, but 3 interceptions, the type of plays that you almost never see from Patrick Mahomes, really allowing Denver to get back into this game. But no, you said it. I think right before, the 3 or 4 series before the concussion were the best 3 or 4 series that Russell Wilson has strung together all year.
Yeah.
I think this is the first time in a long time that you said, wow, that looks like Seattle Russell Wilson. The way he's scrambling around, he's directing traffic, he's throwing the ball deep, making things happen. I mean, he was really, really good for like a solid 2 quarters before Ripien had to come in and finish this thing out. But even with Ripien, Denver was able to move the ball. Kansas City really did not show up defensively in this game. Running the ball, Denver kind of got away from it, but they had a decent amount of success, especially with Wilson on the ground. Latavius Murray, Marlon Mack combined for 11 carries. Mike Boone snuck his way in there as well. But this is a game where, being down 27-0, Denver had to commit to the pass, and it was working.
Yeah. It was weird without Cortland Sutton, no less, too. Jerry Jeudy was awesome in this game.
Yep.
Not like a huge yardage game, but his routes when he got open were fantastic. 8 for 73 and the 3 touchdowns, obviously. They were a little lucky on the Marlon Mack play. The screenplay worked, but then, just to be able to make so many different cuts all the way through the field there. Hey, good on Mack for, making those cuts, though, but you shouldn't expect a whole lot of repeatability about that. But the Broncos, like you said, they were forced to pass, even though they were running the ball pretty well, although a lot of that was Wilson. The running backs didn't do much at all. In fact, only 14 carries from running backs in this game. But not a whole lot of yardage from those. 14 for 59. So most of the damage was done by Wilson on the ground. But yeah, it was a totally 2 different games. And I think almost like the Chiefs took their foot off the gas a little bit there. And obviously Mahomes, those two picks in the first half gave the Broncos some life.
Yeah, I mean, the 2 picks, but also the Broncos converting both of those into touchdowns. I mean, the Broncos put up 28 points. I mean, this is an eruption by Denver Broncos standards. This is the equivalent of any other team scoring like 55 points. Seriously,
this was 2 games of production for them. Yep.
More than 2 if you just take their average. I mean, they basically, they were averaging like 13 points per game coming into the year. That's going to rise, obviously. But yeah, you said it, the 2 interceptions on back-to-back possessions by Mahomes. You almost never see that from him, but props to Denver for converting those. And the other thing was, they scored that touchdown just before the half, and then they get the ball back. And so they scored 3 touchdowns in what felt like, I don't know, like 25 minutes of real time.
Yeah.
They scored one with 1:35 left in the half, and then they scored one with 9 seconds left in the half, and then scored again to open the third quarter. So it very, very quickly went from, oh my God, are the Chiefs going to win this game 50-0 to what is going on? It's 27-21.
Yep. That's right. So, some positives to build off of, but now we'll see if it's going to be Ripien or if it's going to be Russell Wilson this upcoming week. On the Chiefs side, they get back on track. They're still behind the Bills. They're the same record, but Bills have the tiebreaker on the head-to-head game there, though. Mm-hmm. They didn't quite clinch the AFC West yet. They need another win or Chargers loss somewhere down in the next 4 weeks. I think we'll get there. But all in all, they played badly and won in the second half. Mm-hmm. So there's something to be said for that too. We saw a pretty tough run by Pacheco late to clinch that game on a first, got that last first down, and that was nice from him. But it was the McKinnon show, and Jerick McKinnon was on a lot of people's fantasy benches this week. He went off 7 for 112 and the 2 touchdowns. That fluky play for one of them, where schoolyard play by Mahomes that he seems to do against Denver every year. But then he had another reception for a touchdown too. 7 for 112 in the passing game.
Yeah, 7 for 112 on McKinnon. I got to say, I didn't have him in any fantasy teams. Did have him in my prize picks lineup, though. I think his number was like 19.5 receiving yards, so cleared that one pretty easily. He looked great. Another kind of quiet game for Travis Kelce by his standards. This is now 3 games in a row where he's had exactly 4 catches, only 1 touchdown in that span. So for a guy who was just running away with the tight end 1 spot this season, and he still is, and he's going to finish as easily the number 1 tight end. But that gap, he hasn't exactly widened it over the last 3 weeks. I know not everybody could be Evan Ingram every single week, Jeff, but relatively disappointing. He's one of those guys, much like Saquon, like Nick Chubb, like ETN, these guys who were winning you fantasy matchups a month ago, kind of started to cool off at the wrong time.
Yeah. 9 targets to this one. So it wasn't
Yeah.
really a lack of opportunity, but gets the Texans this week, probably gets well this week is my guess. Although, as we've demonstrated and we've talked about, passing against the Texans isn't necessarily a big key to success. But we did see, at the other hand, we did see Dalton Schultz do some damage against them this past week as well. Let's talk Bucks and Niners. This was never close. This was a total squash. They got the second half touchdown, sure, but ugly game for the Bucks. Even their touchdown was a fluke. It was a deflection from one receiver, went through Godwin's hands, and Russell Gage was there. It had to be reviewed to see if his knee was down and all that. Just ugly game. Tom Brady banged his hand against his thumb against on rusher in the second half. So we'll watch his status. Threw the ball 55 times, only 253 yards to show for it.
Ugh. Yeah, this was the same old script for Tampa Bay, right? I mean, how many times have we seen this? Try to run the ball, can't do it. Got to throw a million short passes, and it just amounted to nothing. This was a pretty rough week. It goes without saying for my Brady, Godwin, Evans stack team. This was, I mean, they had the long touchdown to Evans that got called back. That almost salvaged it for me, but tough day for Brady with the 2 picks. He's looked really shaky these last couple of weeks, but you said it. I mean, this game got away from Tampa essentially right away. I mean, the 49ers marched down, get a touchdown on their first play. They were up 21-0, then 28-0 just before the half. And we saw San Francisco play really conservatively for most of the second half, as Kyle Shanahan is wont to do. But Brock Purdy looked great in this game. A couple big time throws down the sideline, had one to McCaffrey for a touchdown. He was fantastic. Relatively quiet day for Brandon Ayuk, had a touchdown, but just 2 catches for 57 yards. But I think coming out of this one, we're keeping an eye on the Brock Purdy oblique situation. They said he suffered the injury. I think it was during the second quarter. So obviously it wasn't bad enough that he wasn't able to play through it, but we'll see what goes on there. And then Deebo Samuel, thankfully, it looks like he avoided, anything extremely serious as far as like a torn ACL or something like that. But even a high ankle sprain, that looked bad.
Oh
I mean, that was a, like, the cart's out. All the teammates are surrounding him. You're thinking like, we might not see him until midway through next season. So all in all, it feels like a win that he didn't suffer any torn ligaments, but I don't think we see Deebo Samuel again in the regular season. That feels like a given.
Yeah, they said it was a high ankle sprain, and usually those are 4 to 6 weeks. So, that they're going to have to do the next man up thing. Maybe you'll see them run the ball a little bit more against Seattle. You want to do that anyhow. So you'll see McCaffrey, a lot of McCaffrey, who looked great, by the way. 14 for 119, a 38-yarder for a touchdown, also caught a touchdown pass. That had to be reviewed. Would have been the most ridiculous overturn ever had they not allowed that as a touchdown, but fortunately they did. I'm so angry about the whole what is a catch thing becoming a thing again. The NFL just can't seem to get that right. Ayuk's touchdown was pretty, really beautiful move to get open, but he only had 3 targets in this game. Like you said, they went conservative in the second half.
Yeah, they really did, and you can't fault them. I mean, this is the team that they love going conservative when they're up like 10 in a game. So when you're up 28-0, of course they're going to go conservative.
Sure.
But overall, I think you come out of this game feeling really good about Brock Purdy, right? You still wonder what the ceiling is, but I mean, I think if you just kind of remove the numbers and the names, it's like he played just as well as Jimmy Garoppolo has at any point this season against what's ultimately still at least a decent defense for Tampa Bay. But McCaffrey looked great. We were a little concerned about his injury situation. He didn't look affected at all. Jordan Mason had some decent runs at garbage time for this team as well. I think if you're San Francisco, you're very worried about the Deebo Samuel situation, especially, if he's not able to play, to begin the postseason. That is a massive, massive blow for a team that's already, down its top 2 quarterbacks. But I think, you at least saw enough from Purdy that you could convince yourself that, look, if we're healthy and we're rolling, like, could this guy kind of be a Nick Foles type of situation? Like, that's in the cards now.
Yeah, it could be. I think as there's more tape on him, it'll get a little tougher, but maybe not this week. Thursday game, so it might be sloppy anyhow, especially with no Deebo. We'll see how they, that changes a lot of their different things. It takes away a running threat. We'll see how they adjust to that. You might see a little bit more Jordan Mason. Jordan Mason looked good too, 11 for 56. Kittle was involved early, but not so much late, 4 for 28. I actually started Ingram over Kittle in one league. That felt pretty good.
That's why you're the best, Jeff.
I also benched Ingram in another league, so we're not going to talk about that. And I would have benched him in another league, but for the fact that Kmet was on bye. So I had Ingram in like 3 leagues. I started him in 2 and benched him in 1. So
I'll say
those 33 points on my bench was fun.
Yeah, always fun. The league that I'm starting him in was my Kyle Pitts league. So ironically enough, it's like Kyle Pitts, starting him every week and getting 8 points. Like, thankfully, the injury finally opened the doors for Evan Ingram. Although we should say, like, guaranteed like 2 catches for 20 yards next week against Dallas, right? Like, all these people are going to throw him into the lineup and going to be very, very let down.
Yeah. Use him in DFS. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're going to go chase that for sure. I'll probably be one of them. Who knows? Last game. Dolphins and the Chargers. This was a weird one, Nick. Miami got just destroyed. Total yardage battle wasn't even remotely close in this one here. At one point, Tua is 3 of 17. They just shut down, and they were missing so many key defensive players. The Chargers were, and Miami. Austin Jackson being out is a bigger deal than I think it's being led on. He's out, is on IR right now. And Terron Armstead played, but I think that was a problem. They're consistently pressuring Tua, even if they weren't always sacking him. And they were just off. The time of possession battle wasn't close. The yardage battle wasn't close. Miami seems banged up. Tyreek Hill wasn't in on the last series. Jalen Waddle did nothing for the second week in a row. Jeff Wilson got hurt in a great matchup. It's just a disaster game for Miami.
Yeah, you said it. Rattling off some of those just kind of basic comparative stats. This was as one-sided as a 6-point game could possibly be.
Yep.
I felt like, especially when you consider that the 2 touchdowns for Miami, one came on like a fumble Ruski, and the other came on a ball that probably should have been intercepted if the defender didn't kind of trip up at the last second. Just it was like the Tom Brady, Mike Evans, just huck it up there and hopefully Tyreek Hill brings it down, and he did. But it felt desperation. To me, it wasn't like I didn't come out of that play thinking like, wow, great design, great throw by Tua. That was like we need a touchdown here. I'm just going to throw it up and close my eyes and hope for the best. Like that's what the Miami offense was all night. I mean, they had nothing whatsoever. Like you said, Tua was 3 of 17. He finished this game 10 of 28. I went back on StatHead. This was the least efficient game in which a quarterback has attempted at least 25 passes since the Duck Hodges game against Baltimore in 2019. In terms of completion percentage. So, I mean, it was that bad. It was a historically bad night for Tua Tagovailoa. And 2-3 weeks ago, we felt like Miami was this super dangerous team. They got to win over the Bills. They beat the Baltimore Ravens. They could score on anybody. And 2 weeks later, I have major questions about Tua. I mean, this is 2 weeks in a row where he's looked abjectly terrible for 80% of the night.
Yeah, 100% agree. And they face the Bills on the road this upcoming week. Nice schedule, by the way. 3 straight roadies. Niners, Chargers was supposed to be the easy game, and they got smashed. And now the Bills, and it's going to snow. This does not look good at all for Miami. I'm going to be watching the Hill injury reports. I'm going to be watching the Waddle injury reports. Jeff Wilson's probably not going to play. Short rest. I mean, they played Sunday night, and then they got to go play Saturday. It's just the schedule makers had it out for him on this one here.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'll do a quick peek at this game. They're 7.5-point dogs in this game at Buffalo, and rightfully so. I mean, this is the way that this team is playing right now. Like you said, if there is weather in Buffalo on Saturday night, I don't think that helps Miami by any means. I think this is a team that can, if you're getting pushed around by the Chargers, that says a lot. I mean, that is a team that is not capable of pushing around many teams, but we should give credit to Justin Herbert, by the way, who looked amazing this game, had some just ridiculous throws. I mean, there was a legitimate Tua Herbert, who would you rather have debate earlier this season. That's not even close to me. Like, this game notwithstanding,
earlier this season was this going into this week. There was still, people are, there was the infamous Vine quarterback comment about the social media quarterback thing on Herbert. I think we kind of, I think we could dismiss that at least for a week or two.
Herbert's unbelievable, man. I think awesome. Anybody who doesn't see that, I don't know what you're watching. Tua has his moments. He's had some good moments this year. I'm not taking that away from him, but Tua's lows are just ridiculously low. Herbert's lows are not that low at all. And I think Herbert, Tua, it seems like is in the best possible scheme for him. He has the you could argue the two best like tandem receivers in the league. He has a coach who set up everything perfectly for him. And I would say the opposite for Herbert. He has two good receivers. They're always hurt. They were healthy in this game, and we saw how effective they could be. 18 for almost or for over 200 yards combined between Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. Both played really well in this game. Both had impressive catches. Mike Williams had a crazy one down the sideline early
catch.
on. It was another just like prototypical Austin Eckler game. Relatively quiet on the ground. 8 for 59 through the air, but it still feels like when you watch the Chargers, at least half of the time, you're saying like, is this a well-coached team? I don't think it's a well-coached team. I don't like the positions that they're putting Justin Herbert in, and that wasn't necessarily true last night. But I think for these guys to be, I guess you could say they're in the same neighborhood, but I just feel like if Herbert had a lot of the benefits that Tua did, this wouldn't even be a debate.
I'd agree with that. I think the Wilson injury is big. Mostert couldn't get going. This was supposed to be a great smash matchup. The fact that they fell behind so far, I mean, that had a lot to do with it too. All these 3-and-outs. I mean, the thing is, they didn't try to run the ball a whole lot early on in this game. Their touchdown came on a Wilson fumble, obviously. Mm-hmm. By the way, Tyreek Hill gets the touchdown credit, but he doesn't get the yardage credit. I kind of wonder why. Shouldn't those be rushing yards? They're not.
It's a good question. I asked you the same thing because at the end of that Tampa New Orleans game on Monday, they ran the typical lateral play, and Kamara picks it up and he gained like 8 or 9 yards. But I guess I don't know the rule on that. I looked it up on Twitter after the Kamara play, and I saw a bunch of people saying, why am I not getting credit for the yards? But I saw other people saying that they did get credit for it. So I think part of it comes down to which fantasy platform you use and how they credit that. But yeah, in terms of total yards, I would have to look deeper into that because he'll pick that up and ran a good, it was right at midfield. 60. He ran like 50 yards.
Yeah. 60 yards. I need those 6 points badly.
Yeah.
But in like multiple places. So yeah, give me those yards. All right. So there you go. That's honestly, yeah. So I think Miami's in trouble. We'll see. They're still right now, they're still in the playoffs. So they have, I guess, a little bit of a buffer. They're 8-5, but people are gaining. If they lose and the Chargers win next week, Chargers obviously are going to have the head-to-head against them. So that's a tough one. Chargers host Tennessee. You're not going to have this invading horde of Titans fans, so it won't have this huge home field disadvantage like they usually do. Tickets are as low as $21 there, though, so you still can go to SoFi for that. Although parking will be $210, so they get you one way or another. But it's Miami 6 and the Chargers are the 7. Bengals are the 5 right now, and they've got a 2-game buffer over the Chargers and Jets and all that. So they're in pretty decent shape. But Miami and the Chargers both have to get going.
They do. It's not going to be easy for Miami. Like you said, at Buffalo, that's a really, really difficult game on a short week. Going, you're going from at the Chargers to at the Bills. It could not be a further trip. That's troubling. They're home for Green Bay on Christmas Day. To me, that's somewhat of a toss-up right now with how Miami's playing, with some of the injuries they're dealing with. You mentioned Tyreek Hill. I thought he was clearly favoring that hamstring. He stayed in the game, but you could see he was kind of pulling up at the end of routes. They were basically just running go balls to him and Jalen Waddle late in the game. They're just sprinting down the field, sprinting back, trying to go hurry up. I don't think that helped. But after the Green Bay game, Miami's at New England, somewhat of a toss-up game, and then they get the Jets in Week 18, and that's a Jets team that could very much need that game. So they're not one of those teams that you're like, oh, you get the Texans in Week 18, or you get an Eagles team that's maybe resting everybody. Like they're going to have 4 very difficult games the rest of the way.
Yeah, I think you get pressure on Miami, they're in trouble. So San Francisco was able to do it. The Chargers, was a surprise that they were able to do so without Bosa. And I think that was, and it didn't always amount into sacks, only 2 sacks, but that's a big part of it there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, big win by the Chargers. This was, kind of one of those classic games. There's 1 or 2 each week, Jeff, where I was on the Dolphins in my pick'em league. Right away, you're like, nope, wrong pick. This is not good. Dolphins are not ready for this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was kind of a must-win game for them after their disappointing game in Vegas the week before. Yeah. Now they're kind of in that must-win mode for the rest of the year, which might be where they may need that sense of urgency. They may play better because of that. Any other thoughts on Week 14 before we sign off?
Not too much. I mean, just to finish this out, it's kind of the opposite situation for the Chargers, where their schedule, they're home for the Titans. That's a Titans team that's lost 3 in a row. Wheels kind of coming off there.
Yeah.
Then they get the Colts, the Rams, and the Broncos to finish out. So if you're comparing Chargers Dolphins straight up, obviously the Dolphins currently have the advantage in terms of record, but the Chargers are the Chargers. They'll probably find a way to mess this up, but they have the vastly easier schedule down the stretch.
So you're talking about one team, the Broncos, who just got eliminated. The Colts and the Rams next are literally the next two teams in line to be eliminated from the playoffs. And chances are by the time they face them, they will be eliminated. So who knows what you'll see out of those teams too. The Texans did put up a fight after being eliminated. So it's still possible, but you think that would only bode well for them. So yeah, pretty good setup. They get through this game, and that's not an easy thing to do. You're going to see about 37 runs from Derrick Henry against them. The Titans will not make the mistake about not running the ball against them. We know that. But yeah, it'll be interesting. All right. That is going to wrap up today's podcast. Thanks to No House Advantage for their sponsorship. Thank you guys for tuning in. And good luck in your fantasy playoffs. If you've made the playoffs, good luck in week 15, everyone. Take care.